On today's show, I am breaking down the best case scenario for the Texas Rangers this offseason. What is the highest your hopes can possibly go, and how realistic would those hopes be? All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked on to the Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan since 2010, the founder and host for all 4 seasons of this Locked On Rangers podcast. On today's show, I am breaking down the best case scenario for your Texas Rangers. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers and subscribe on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment any single thing below. Now, let's lay it out. What do the Rangers have left to do? What have they already done? They made a trade for a number 4 starter in Jake Odorizzi. They signed Martin Perez to the qualifying offer for 1 year and $19.65 million. So what all is left to do? Well, in my opinion, there are 3 things left to do. Get 2 starting pitchers and 1 bat. I think the most likely route to do that is to pay one of those top 3 pitchers on the market big bucks to come pitch for your team, then trade some prospect depth to go and get out a top tier-ish or maybe top of the rotation starting pitcher to pair with whoever you get of those big 3 in Jacob deGrom, Carlos Rodon, and Justin Verlander, and then go sign a bat. Probably don't trade for a bat because there's plenty of corner outfield bats to go throw in left field, and bing, bang, boom, that's your team. And I think depending on who they get, they actually could be fighting for one of those wild card spots. So let's start with the pitchers. At this point, I still think that I would rather have Jacob deGrom, and I think that would be a good option if they get him. But I'm thinking the more likely route is Carlos Rodon. He is fantastic. Honestly, of those top 3, no matter which one the Rangers get, if they do get one of those 3, which I'm feeling like they should because they're the most desperate and have the biggest amount of money to get their payroll from where it is to where it probably should be given their market size and how good they are hoping to be. I think that they have a lot of money to money whip one of these guys, and I think one of them is going to want to sign in Texas. Jacob deGrom has already shown interest. Carlos Rodon has met with the Rangers, and he is, I believe, he is a Scott Boras client, and the Rangers have very, very good relationships with Scott Boras because they signed 2 of his big guys to $500 million in a 2-day span, and that tends to, boost your relationship with certain agents and might make them say, hey, might tell their other clients, hey, this is the place to go. But I think Carlos Rodon is the way to go. Coming off his best career year, coming off a healthy year, coming off 2 great seasons. One was shot down a little bit by injuries in 2021. He has been an all-star for 2 straight years, finished top 6 in Cy Young voting for 2 straight years, and he is absolutely fantastic. A left-hander who will be able to go deep into games, had a sub-3 ERA this year, a 5.4 baseball reference WAR this year, and 237 strikeouts in 170 innings. The guy is a strikeout machine and is very, very effective. I think somewhere in the 5-year $150-ish million range. That's about $30 million a year if my math is right. If it's not, please tell me in the comments because my math is most definitely suspect. That's adding $30 million to your payroll. That is going to be your biggest free agent addition, the biggest contract added on the books, and the second highest paid player on your team behind Corey Seager, and that would be ahead of Marcus Semien. But I think Carlos Rodon is definitely worth the money. I really, really like him, keeping him on your team for 5 years. He is younger than those other guys. He does have a decent injury history, but he has been healthy this year and was healthy for the most part in 2021. He is a top end. He slots in as your number one starter. You have another left-hander in the rotation with Martin Perez. I think having two lefties in the rotation, two of them in your top three. Well, at that point, it would be your top two would both be lefties. And I think that is a great, great place to be because the bar for lefty pitchers doing well against lefty hitters is very, very low. And having two of those guys that are, really, really good against righties too is also very, very helpful. Second, the Rangers need to make a trade for another starting pitcher, or they could go shop in the bargain bin, but this is the best case scenario. So I am going with a trade for Corbin Burnes, and I think something in the Rangers middle infield depth would be what it takes. Maybe an Ezekiel Duran plus Luis Angel Acuna plus throw in who else you want in there. Maybe a pitching prospect or two. I think I'm hesitant to include a whole bunch of Rangers pitching prospects, not because I don't think they're good, because a lot of them are coming off of weird years or not healthy years or just different things that are kind of tanking their value that I think they're going to bounce back next year. And selling them now would be selling them definitely at the low end of their value. So I think something like a Luis Angel Acuna, Ezekiel Duran, then maybe you throw in someone else in the top 10 like a Dustin Harris or a Justin Foscue, depending on what you think the Brewers might like. I think it would take a hefty toll to get Corbin Burnes. He is a Cy Young winner. He has an ERA title, a two-time All-Star in back-to-back seasons. This year he had a 202 innings pitched with a sub-3 ERA yet again. This is the second year in a row that he has done that. He also did it in 2020, but wasn't a primary starter, so I kind of don't count that. These are kind of his first 2 years as a primary starter. Really, the first year in the big leagues where 100% of his games pitched were starts, he won a Cy Young at age 26. He will be in his age 28 season next year. He is a right-handed dominant player, and the Rangers could definitely use someone of his caliber. You have a 1-2 punch of Jacob deGrom and Corbin Burnes. That is one of the better top two punches in terms of the top of your rotation in all of baseball. It sets the tone. Okay, this is legit. The Rangers are really, really going for it, and shows the rest of the world this is not the same Texas Rangers team that lost 94 games last year or that lost 102 games the year before that. This is a team that is serious about contention and that is going all in and making a big, big splash to do so. I think it would be probably cost maybe someone in those top three-ish of your pitching prospects. It would be a hefty toll. You get 2 seasons of Corbin Burnes. He would still be under team control. He would be under arbitration in those years, so not making a huge hefty sum. But you would also be able to, extend him a contract extension. If you wanted to keep him around long term, you'd have a couple of years to see, okay, does this guy like it here? Is it a fit? Do we want to sign him to a big old deal? But for those 2 years, he would be under team control and you'd be able to get another top end guy without having to, spend 100 and however much million it would take to get deGrom. But I think that would be a great place to start. Coming up, we're going to look at the bats on this market. Who is the best case scenario and how much the Rangers could afford if they signed Carlos Rodon to a big old contract. First episode is brought to you by SimpliSafe. If you thought about securing your home with home security but have been putting it off, you will want to listen up. Right now, Locked On Rangers listeners can order the #1 rated SimpliSafe home security system for 50% off. This is their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Here is why you'll love it. SimpliSafe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report for a 3rd year in a row. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents using Fast Protect technology exclusively from SimpliSafe to capture critical evidence and verify the threat is real so you can get a priority police response. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I recommend. Get 50% off any new SimpliSafe system at simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. This is their biggest discount of the year, so do not wait. That's simplisafe.com/lockedonmlb. There's no safe like SimpliSafe. Now, let's take a look at the bats. There are a few options on the market. Most of the big bats this offseason are of the shortstop up the middle variety. There are three really main guys. Maybe you can squint and see a fourth if you are squinting pretty hard. But the Rangers are pretty much out. The infield is set for the next, 4 years, however long Nathaniel Lowe is under contract for. I think he's got at least another 3 years under contract, but infield is set for the foreseeable future. It's going to be the predictable two up the middle, Josh Young at third base and Nathaniel Lowe at first base. So the real place that the Rangers can upgrade is in left field. They had 13 or 14 different players play left field last year. All of them did some things well. Some did things better than others. I think at this point, Bubba Thompson is your everyday starting left fielder if no changes are made. But as much as I like Bubba and I think he provides value, I do think on a playoff team, he should probably be your fourth outfielder, a guy who's got insane speed, does provide offensive value, got on base at a higher clip than I was expecting, and is the fastest player in the league, has some raw power that they're encouraging him not to tap into. But I think the Rangers probably could and should do a little bit better than him going into next season if they are wanting to be taken seriously as a playoff contender. Maybe Ezekiel Duran would win that job from him out of camp. I do think that Duran's ceiling is a whole lot higher. I know Bubba is a little faster, defensively a little bit better, but Ezekiel Duran's got a cannon for an arm, hits a lot better, hits for a lot more power, and I think overall the offensive and just general ceiling is just a little bit higher, actually a lot bit higher on Ezekiel Duran. But center field is pretty much locked down by Leody Taveras. I think he's going to earn that job out of camp if he can just be average offensively in center field. Then he's going to be a 3 or 4 win player with how insanely good his defense is. So the Rangers are looking at a left fielder. And even though Brandon Nimmo played primarily center field last year for the Mets, I think the Rangers signed him. He is going into left field. They are not going to sign him and then move Leody Taveras into left field. If Leody is starting, it's starting in center field. If he is not in center field, then he should not be a starting player because his defense is just unreal. Brandon Nimmo was fantastic last year for the Mets. He is a guy who is a sky-high career on-base percentage of .385, a career OPS of .827, averages about 20-ish home runs a year, which is pretty darn solid for your left fielder overall. Offensively, he is providing a whole lot of value, turning that lineup over, getting on base, working good at bats, and I think he could definitely be an ideal someone in the maybe in that leadoff hole, but it seems like the Rangers are pretty set on what they've got 1 through 4, maybe at least 1 through 3 in their starting lineup, with Marcus Semien leading off, Corey Seager in the 2-hole, and Nathaniel Lowe in 3-hole. At this point, I think it's Adolis Garcia hitting cleanup, but that is definitely subject to change based on how well Mitch Garver is doing. I think he could definitely slot in batting cleanup, and then maybe Nimmo is in your 5-hole. Maybe you put him leading off and you kind of change some things around. Maybe Seager ends up hitting third and Lowe ends up hitting cleanup. I don't know, but I know that Brandon Nimmo is a guy who is going to slot in to that top 4. Maybe if you want to put him 5th, then you could put him there. But he is a guy who provides a ton of value. It's not going to be insanely expensive, and if the Mets are intent on keeping Jacob deGrom around, which I think they are, they're already on the high end of payrolls at this moment and probably only going to get higher. But I think Brandon Nimmo is a guy who could slip through their fingers and head to a place like Texas where he would be very, very appreciated. There are some other teams that are looking for outfielders, but I think the Rangers definitely have the cash to spend for what I think would be a 5-year, $105 million deal. I know I just said, wow, they're going to spend $150 million on Carlos Rodon. How can they afford adding another $100+ million contract? Well, because the Rangers have money, and they have not spent a whole lot of money at all the last couple of seasons. They did spend it last offseason. They didn't spend a whole lot in 2019, really in 2018 or 2020, to be honest. It's been a hot minute. The Rangers have spent, but it has been a long time since they have done so. If they added those 2 contracts, I know it sounds, $250 million in contracts. Oh my gosh, how are the Rangers going to afford that? Well, it's spread out over the course of 5 years. That is adding, $50 million to the payroll. At this point, here is where the Rangers stand in terms of payroll. Right now, they are in, 12th place at $108 million. They're sandwiched behind the Toronto Blue Jays and ahead of the St. Louis Cardinals. That's a little low. I think they can add just a little bit more. And this was before anybody has really signed anybody to any huge contracts. Compare that to last year. Say the Rangers add that, they'd be at around $180 million, maybe 185. Either way, that puts them, right about where they are. Right about where they are. It would put them right behind the Blue Jays, who are in 11th, and ahead of the Giants, who were in 12th last year. Last year, the Blue Jays had $188 million on their payroll, and the Giants had $173 million. So not even in the top 10 for last year. And I think it's probably only going to skyrocket. They'd probably be somewhere around the middle of the pack. And the thing is, that would be the Rangers' big spending for the foreseeable future. You'd have all your big guys really under contract. The Rangers wouldn't have a huge need unless Carlos Rodon, God forbid, has some big injury, or any of these guys have some big injury and the Rangers have a need to go and, sign somebody else to a big old contract. But the top end, most expensive guys would be locked up for the long term. Middle infield locked up for the long term. Third base is secured for the long term. Martin Perez, he's going to be free agent after next year. We'll look at that later. But John Gray has got another few years on his deal, and whoever you sign at the top end of your rotation, in terms of Carlos Rodon at this point, that guy is locked up for 5 years under contract. So I feel like that would be a smart and safe move. Coming up, we're going to look a little bit more at why this makes sense and why the Rangers should go this route. But first, this episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. You can get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from football to basketball to soccer and esports. We have got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and easiest way to get in your betting fix. If you are making some bets on the World Cup, the U.S. is through to the round of 16. Unfortunately, Mexico is not. If you are feeling confident about the U.S. being able to beat the Netherlands, hats off to you. You probably haven't watched a whole lot and haven't been burned by the U.S. men's national team enough to be skeptical of that. Or if you're feeling like, I'm going to wager, buoy level the playing field. So if the U.S. does lose, I'm going to bet on the Netherlands. So either way, either I'm going to win money or I'm going to be happy that the U.S. goes on. You can do that at BetOnline, because head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more, because BetOnline, it's where the game starts. Now, let's take a look at why the Rangers could and should do this. Like I just said, the Rangers will have their core, the most expensive pieces, locked into that deal for the long term. The next piece you would have to start waiting on is shoring up some of that pitching depth. But what this does, the Rangers have that pitching depth, and assuming they're not trading, all of their top end guys at the top end of the pitching ranks of their prospect organization, they will have some guys, hopefully, that are matriculating into the system, into the big leagues, that are reaching their potential, starting to become those cheap, controllable, really darn good starting pitchers. So if you're losing Martin Perez next year, maybe in 2024, the Rangers have Jack Leiter in the big leagues. Maybe the Rangers have Owen White in the big leagues, or Kumar Rocker. Maybe one or even multiple of those guys are in the big leagues. And so you're having Carlos Rodon at the number one of your rotation. Maybe at that point, you still, in 2024, you'd still have Corbin Burnes under contract, even if you decided, we're not going to extend him to a long-term contract. We're going to let him walk and be a free agent after 2024. That's fine, because you have some of these guys matriculating up into the big leagues. Brock Porter, I think it'll be probably 2025 by the time he makes his big league debut, but that's really just a wild guesstimate. And for these guys, it takes a couple years for them once they get into the big leagues to start kind of hitting their stride. And so maybe by 2025, you let that Corbin Burnes go. You still have another few years of Carlos Rodon. You still have, I think, 1 year of John Gray. And then you have maybe year 2 and 3 are Jack Leiter and Owen White. And maybe Kumar Rocker is also there. Maybe, I don't know, maybe Cole Winn figures it out and he's your number 4 or 5. I think that is where you're starting to look and see, okay, well, the Rangers have pretty much everything on lock. And at that point, you've also got Evan Carter coming up, and he should be about hitting his stride by 2025. I'm thinking, I'm assuming he makes the big leagues probably 2024 at the latest, I'm thinking, depending on if there's some injury or the back injury kind of flares up. But and you're still looking, that window is wide open. And in all those years, you have a team that's good enough to make the playoffs, and it's cost controlled. And if you want to go spend big at that point on whatever star free agent is available, I think you can. I think you don't have to, but you can. And you also have, some of those guys that are, finding their stride. Josh Young is a core piece in your lineup at that point. Maybe that's when you have to start looking at a Nathaniel Lowe contract extension. But still, that is the ideal version of this team, and it's still not a hugely expensive roster. I mean, it's not going to be top 5, but it's going to be up there about commensurate to the market size and what you would kind of want and expect for a team that is in as big a market, that has had the history of success that the Texas Rangers have had. It's going to be a pretty penny in these first 2 years, but we kind of knew last year. I mean, even though it was really nice, it was really great, don't get me wrong. Loved the Marcus Semien signing, loved the Corey Seager signing, really, really liked the John Gray signing, and the other ones were, well, Martin Perez worked out, and other signings were had. But if you look at this roster, there are still significant upgrades that need to be made that can be done in free agency, or if you're getting hesitant about, spending all this money, first off, as a fan, unless you are Rangers ownership listening to this podcast, in which case, hello, please do these things. But if you're not Rangers ownership, if you don't have actual shares of the team, remember, this is not your money. Money isn't real. Money is made up, especially when it's in the millions and billions and all this nonsense. It is hypothetical, theoretical, cannot be physically contemplated, understood, whatever word I'm supposed to be using there. And again, Rangers ownership, if you are listening to this, for practical purposes, with the Rangers not being in the top 5, even if you do miss the playoffs, you can see where I'm going with this. This team, you can see that there is a vision there and that it is a competent team, that you will not be laughed at. You will not be like the Angels. You don't want to be like the Angels because that's embarrassing. You don't want to be like the Rockies because that's super duper embarrassing, where you have a top 10, top 5 payroll and you can't do anything with it. That's not what this team would be. It would be competitive. It would be fighting in a very, very difficult division with maybe the Angels figure it out and, take advantage of having the 2 best players on the planet of their generation and do something with it. Maybe they don't. Maybe the Mariners, continue to be really darn good, have a lot of young talent, and, maybe they spend big this free agency and go get one of those shortstops and cement themselves even more as, hey, we're not just a little flash in the pan like people have thought we've been for the last couple of years. We are legitimately here to contend and kick some butt and to maybe kick the Astros' butt. Like, that is where this team is. And I think that if you told me before the offseason, before you really look at it, pie in the sky, well, the Rangers could sign Carlos Rodon and Brandon Nimmo and trade for Corbin Burnes. Yeah, that sounds, fancy, pantsy, schmancy. Like, this is not the most unreal, unbelievable. I mean, if I could have said, oh, well, the Rangers just go sign DeGrom and Rodon, and they also signed Aaron Judge, and they also signed Brandon Nimmo, and they just signed everybody to all the money forever, and they just kick everybody's butts and win 130 games next year. No, that's not likely. That's not happening. This is a realistic scenario that could happen, and if I'm completely honest, I think it should. And the Rangers should not be scared to go and spend money on both these guys. Nimmo, if you're going to spend on somebody who is in the kind of top 10-ish tier of free agents with these top 3 starting pitchers and the shortstops and Aaron Judge, and I think Nimmo is probably the 10th one on this list, he might be the least sexy. He might not be the flashiest of these top 10-ish guys. But I do think he is by far the safest bet. On base does not fade with age. I know people bag on the Shin-Soo Choo contract. He does kind of remind me a little bit of a better, more powerful, and better defensive Shin-Soo Choo. I do realize what I'm saying in that. But Shin-Soo Choo, you go back and look at that contract. Go back and look what he actually did, and do not think about that contract. You say, oh, that's a pretty productive player for most of his time in Texas. I think Brandon Nimmo could definitely be that. Give some depth to your lineup. The top end is already set. It's already really darn good. Great job getting that. Now, the hardest part is going from a team which I think last year, Pythagorean-wise, they were around a little below 500. Taking that step from absolute garbage to mid is, I think, what they did last year. Taking the step from mid to good is difficult. The hardest step is going from good to great. This is the second hardest step, is going from kind of mid-ish to, well, the team's scrappy and they should make the playoffs, and maybe they'll do some damage when they're there. I think that's definitely a doable thing with not too many steps. Look at that. Three players added. 3 players. That's all I'm asking for. Just 3 players added. I know it's a lot of money. It's not your money unless your ownership, which, again, it's still not that big a deal. So I think this is a nice theoretical plan for the Rangers, signing Carlos Rodon. They need to stop having the same similar vowel sounds, because I think that might help me separate them. No, sign Carlos Rodon to a 5-year, $150 million deal. Sign Brandon Nimmo to a 5-year, $105 million deal. Trade some prospects for Corbin Burnes. Bing, bang, boom. That is a potentially 90-win team. That is probably definitely a playoff contender, probably a playoff team. And that is a team definitely good enough to snap the losing season streak and the playoff drought that have been happening with this club since 2016. Please, Chris Young and company, make this happen, because you can absolutely do it. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you all so much for listening and subscribing. On tomorrow's show, I will be flipping this on its head, and doing a worst case scenario. So if you're a pessimist, be sure to tune in tomorrow. And on Friday, I'm trying to do a crossover podcast with somebody who the Rangers have a former member of their front office and or coaching staff, to kind of get some more light on those movies. But thanks again for making this your first listen today. For your next listen, check out Locked On Sports Today podcast, the biggest stories of the day, plus instant reactions, big game recaps, and the take of the day. Available on Odyssey app, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank y'all so much for listening, and until next time, don't forget to enjoy baseball.